Hola, buenos dias. This is Stephen French from A-level-spanish.co.uk with another top translation tip. So let's get going. I'm just highlighting on the screen the sentence that I'm going to be translating into Spanish. Nowadays, religious symbols can cause controversy, and I'm going to translate this as the following. Actualmente, los símbolos religiosos pueden causar controversia. Okay, so what I've done is I've broken that sentence into 4 separate bits. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle each bit separately. So let's start with nowadays. Okay, you can see I've highlighted the word nowadays, and then underneath I've got 3 possible translations. So let's talk about each of these. Actualmente, ahora, and hoy en día. So the first point that I'd make, that this should be well-known vocabulary, and perhaps it's just a little bit of extension of vocabulary, just building and bulking out your Spanish. So the first one, actualmente, looks as if it means actually, but it doesn't. It's a false friend. Actualmente means now, nowadays. The current government in Spanish is el gobierno actual. So always sort of a red flag when I see the word actual, actualmente, it doesn't mean actually. Doesn't mean actually, it's a false friend. Coming underneath though, perhaps we've got a couple of more well-known phrases. Ahora, hoy en día, great translations for this nowadays. So, actualmente, ahora, and hoy en día are all possibilities. Now let's move on to the next bit, religious symbols. Okay, los símbolos religiosos. I'm going to make a couple of points here. Hopefully they're familiar points to you, but it's always well worth ramming home these points, especially when you start translating from English to Spanish. Okay, the first thing I've got is that the adjective or describing word is after the noun. So there we've got religiosos sitting after the word símbolos. That's the first thing. The second thing is that my adjective is agreeing. I've got an OS on the end of religiosos because the word símbolos ends in OS as well. So, if you like, for me, there's a sort of poetry in los símbolos religiosos. I can hear the os in los and the os in símbolos and the os in religiosos. And it's that sort of rhythm which, when I'm listening to people who are non-native Spanish speakers, and if they miss it out, is something which I notice. I'm not a native speaker of Spanish myself, but over the years I've begun to recognize that sound and that harmony, if you like. And of course my I is also pretty sharp now, so the OS, and I'm looking for the OS on the end there. So, adjective after the noun, adjectives agree. Of course, adjectives after the noun is not always the case, but in the case of religioso, I'm going to put it afterwards. Coming to the next part, can cause. Okay, there are. I've highlighted it in English, and there's my translation. Pueden causar. Pueden causar. Okay, let's firstly look at pueden. Comes from the radical changing verb poder, meaning to can or to be able. Now, to can sounds a bit strange, but for me, poder means to can or to be able. And that's why I've put it in inverted commas on the notes on the screen there. So, poder in the present tense, because can is the present tense of poder, goes puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, pueden. So I've got my change, my radical change, or my root change, where the O from the infinitive has gone to UE in the first, second, and third person singular, and the third person plural. And in the first and second person plural, it's gone back to the O. So just to repeat, puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, pueden. And because I need the third person plural, because the subject of pueden is plural, third person plural, los símbolos religiosos, I'm going to use pueden. So, pueden causar. One final point before I move on, that poder, to be able to, or to can, is irregular in other tenses. If this doesn't mean too much to you, what I do suggest you do is look it up in one of those verb tables, or verbix.com, very good on the internet, verbix.com, well worth looking up, because there you can get all the verbs in lots of different languages, not only Spanish, set out in the different tenses. Okay, moving on now to the final section here. We've got translating the word controversy. So controversia or polemica. Now firstly, let's look at controversia or controversia. Now, I wasn't sure initially whether it's controversia or controversia. What did I do? I checked. I looked in the dictionary. And sure enough, there is no accent on that final A. So it's not controversia, it's controversia. Now, one of the real advantages of looking words up in the dictionary is that my eye will be caught by other words and other phrases. Now, this might seem slow, and it might seem a little bit archaic in this world of Google Translate and the rest, but I do suggest that serious A-level students start doing this, because you will begin to build up your vocabulary, and that's one of the key things that you need to be doing early in your A-level Spanish career, building that vocabulary up. Okay, and of course what I've also got there is an alternative with a synonym. Now the word polemica, notice that accent on the E there, polemica is the English word polemic. Now, if you didn't know that word before, it means almost exactly the same, i.e. it's a synonym with controversy, but one of the beauties of learning a foreign language is that you start to pick up other words, and in fact it then improves your own English. So, I think that's enough from me. I'm just going to run over my translation. It is: actualmente los símbolos religiosos pueden causar controversia. Okay, so that's internet. Hasta luego y hasta pronto.